Hello, everyone. Content Club bringing you a chat here where world-class historians, producers, and history fans come together to co-fund, co-create, and experience history in a new way. Delighted to say I'm joined by Nick Young, the director of the outstanding recent documentary, How the Holocaust Began. So we're going to dive straight in. Nick, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us how the film began. What was the
Oh,
genesis of this film?
gosh, it's been a long journey. So actually, several years ago, it must be 2 or 3 years ago now, I was reading a book, a fascinating book by a man called Patrick Debois, French priest, who documented his journey across Eastern Europe, uncovering mass graves, mostly in Ukraine. I thought, this is extraordinary. How's nobody ever known about this? And for him, it was a very personal thing. But for me, it sort of suggested that there was a missing chapter in the Holocaust that most of us didn't know about. And I sort of pondered this for a while. And then another conversation with a guy called Chris Going, who I'd worked with before, who's in the film, who's our sort of aerial analyst expert. He's an encyclopedic knowledge of aerial photography, historic air photographs. And he sent me, he showed me a picture of Auschwitz. And it showed the sort of the camp with a sort of massive plume of smoke coming up. And he said, "Look at that. What does it tell you?" I said, "Okay, it's Auschwitz. That's what I'd expect to see." He said, "No, look where the smoke's coming from. It's not coming from the crematoria. It's coming from outside the camps." Said, "Okay." He said, "Well, let me show you some other pictures." And he sent me a series called the Sonderkommando images. And these were taken clandestinely from inside the camp, looking out at piles of bodies being burned. And he said, what that shows you, because we can date the aerial photograph, is exactly when that happened. And it showed a process going on, and it confirmed something from the air that we'd always suspected from the ground. And I thought, hang on, this is interesting. So from this sort of massive trove of air photographs, you can see things happening that aren't necessarily about the war, but other things going on accidentally. I said, is there more of this sort of Holocaust picture that you can see, not just camps, but outside camps? He said, that's absolutely the thing, that what you get from this air photograph resource is, he says, you get the ability to see traces. Every action leaves a trace in the landscape. So if you're looking for those sort of marks of the Holocaust that are not in the camps, we know about the camps, we've got lots of photographs of camps, but beyond that, if you're looking to find that, you can see some of those traces because they're left behind by the people on the ground. You can see those lines, and we actually have a perfect example in the film where he has this town, and he sees something that none of us would ever have seen. He sees this scratch in the landscape, so that doesn't belong there. You go, okay, that's really interesting. So from this conversation with Chris and from reading this book, I sort of suddenly thought, well, maybe there's a way using air photography to sort of prise open this vast untold story that sort of ranges across the whole of Eastern Europe. And I didn't think that much more about it for a while until I spoke to people at Babin Yar in Ukraine, in Kiev. And connected to Chris, and somebody else sort of came into this conversation and said, we've just found where the massacre happened at Babin Yar, one of the biggest massacres of the Holocaust. We know where it is now. Okay, this is all starting to sort of gel a little bit. And I went to Kiev back into 2021 to see if I could sort of unpick more of that story. And suddenly it started to sort of formulate this idea that we could start to tell this lost chapter of the Holocaust. And the more I read into that, the more I realized that this was not only a story that hadn't really been told, that it was foundational to our understanding of the Holocaust. Because I think, as I put at the beginning of the film, I think most of us have this concept, particularly in the West, particularly in the UK and the US, I think, from films like Schindler's List and sort of multiple documentaries, that it's this sort of very, I use the word guardedly, but safe, sanitized thing in our minds. It was, there were camps, it was run by baddies who wore black, and they took these people and they killed them, and it's over there, it's locked behind fences, and it's a sort of very sort of clean and sort of definable story. Actually, what was coming out from this investigation, this research that I was doing, was that there was this vast, messy, horrible Holocaust of sort of Holocaust of neighbors, Holocaust that took place on streets and in neighborhoods. And was not this sort of structured process that we think of it, and this went before. And so I thought, well, maybe there's a narrative here. How did one thing become the other?
Yeah.
How did we get to the gates of Auschwitz?
In terms of filmmaking, one of the things that just absolutely made me think I'm going to love this film. People had told me, I watched it on catch up. People had told me it was remarkable, but the pre-title isn't a pre-title. The film starts.
Yeah,
It's a journey, and you've got a first time really presented Imperial War Museum James Bulgin, who we've
yeah,
viewed separately, on a present tense journey, saying to you, if you think of the Holocaust, you probably think, as you've said, of a camp like this. That's not the story I want to tell you. Talk to me a little bit about how you created that present tense journey with James.
that's a very good question. And this came out with a really useful conversation with Simon Young at the BBC, because when we pitched this idea, Dinah and I, the caravan, pitched this idea to Simon. We sort of knew the essence of what the film that I wanted to make, but quite how to get there. And he said it needs a host. So I absolutely agree with you. And instantly, I started thinking, oh God, okay, we're going to have to use a presenter, and who would it be? And it was actually Simon's idea. And he said, I've seen this guy. We put him in Rise of the Nazis. He's a young, dynamic, energetic historian, professional historian, and he's got this kudos or this sort of this qualification because he created the Holocaust galleries at the Imperial War Museum, so he knows his stuff. But he's not a presenter, and we sort of chatted about this, and we both agreed that what we wanted was a guide on a journey of exploration, an informed guide. So we what we both wanted, and I particularly wanted to get away from, was that sense of an historian turning up and saying, "Let me tell you the story that you don't know. I know all about this and you don't. So I'm going to take you from A to B to C to D, and I'm going to explain all this to you. And then by the end of this film, you'll understand something that I know," which kind of works, but is very unrewarding in a sense because you just go, okay, you're just going to tell me some history. But the other thing about it, and this came out from the first conversation with James, I went and had a good long chat with him at the Imperial War Museum, and I wasn't initially convinced that he was necessarily the right person for the job because he'd done no TV really.
Oh.
But that turned out to be an advantage. And we sat down, we chatted for hours about the nature of this story. And what sold me on that conversation was that he said, I know about this, but I don't really know it. None of us really do, because the nature of the story. And I'll just tell you a little bit, tell the audience a little bit, why this story has been so locked. And we hinted it in the film, but I'll just unpack it a bit more. So locked for so long is because all these countries, from the Baltics down through Ukraine into Moldova and Romania and so on, locked behind this sort of sanitized world of the Iron Curtain for 80 years. And the Soviets, when they sort of pushed the Nazis back, reinvaded, repossessed all these territories, took a conscious decision to brand everything they discovered, every massacre, every horror, every crime, as a crime against Soviet citizens, not against Jews. They took a conscious decision to do that. And all attempts in 80 years to say this was about murdering Jews was suppressed. So not only was it hidden behind this Iron Curtain, it was also it had also been rebranded, and its Jewish nature denied completely to the local population. So there were sort of layers upon layers upon layers of denial. Now that explains why it was only since the fall of the Soviet Union that in the West historians have started to go, oh my God, there's more and more and more and more and more and more of this, which is why Patrick Tabar wrote his book and how we've started to unpick this. Now, it'd be untrue to say it's an unknown story. It's not unknown, it's just not fully explored. And so further conversations then led me to contact investigators. There was a rabbi, an American guy called Richard Freund, who'd got a lot of money together, and he was passionate about sort of uncovering the scale and the nature of these horrific crimes across Eastern Europe. And he garnered teams from various American universities, the guys that we filmed in Latvia and Lithuania, Harry Joel, Phil Reeder, their teams. And I discovered that these people were actively making it their mission to go out there. They were taking teams of students and they were going place by place by place by place, saying, let's find out what is really here. And so suddenly we had an active investigative, forensic investigation to latch onto that would take us into these places and sort of really find out what was going on. So the pieces started to sort of assemble themselves naturally. But the James Bulgin question was solved in that first conversation with James, that I saw his passion to go, I really want to know about this. And that was so essential that he personally, it wasn't me turning up and saying, James, I've got a gig for you. You're interested. It was more that him saying, wow, yes, let's go and tell that story. I've always wanted to tell that story. I like I say, he knew about it. He didn't really know the nature of it. And he knew that there was sort of masses to be discovered. So that was essential. And
sorry, I was just going to say, there's never a single frame in that film where you get the awful sense you sometimes get with recent history documentaries of, I've always been passionately interested in this subject ever since I got the contract.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We've just filmed an interview with James as well to get his perspective. So if you're enjoying this chat, please do watch that as well. But we were cutting a Twitter promo, and you become aware of the sensitive nature of what you're cutting when you're trying to distill it down to 1 minute. And we asked him, what's the hardest thing? And it's a really difficult watch, him talking about the hardest thing. I'm going to ask you the same thing. What was the hardest thing for you making this film?
Oh gosh, look, there were so many challenges on so many levels. I mean, there were practical challenges, logistical challenges, all sorts. For me, it was a sense of responsibility to tell the story well enough for the people in it, the living people in it and the dead people in it. It's an extraordinary fact. So a vast number of the victims of those crimes are still unfound, unknown, unidentified, unacknowledged. They are lost. It was one of the things that I wanted to say in the film. And I think we do say at some point that the Nazis didn't just want to kill these people, they wanted them to have never existed. And part of their mission, these archaeologists and forensic investigators, part of their mission is to give those people back their humanity. They were people, and it's one of the things I wanted to do in that. I put a couple of sequences in the film where I just show some faces. These are people. They're not numbers. They're not statistics. They're not things in the ground. They were people. And so that sense of responsibility, when I was interviewing people like Fina Kukliansky, who lost her grandmother, or talking to the little old lady owner in Butrimonis, to do justice to the people who are lost and tell their story properly, really do it well. And so that's, I mean, we always want to do it well, but it felt like, particularly, I felt that pressure to get it right for them, and to find that sort of emotional, tonal balance between sort of intellectual ideas and emotional content and the graphic nature of the story. And we had long conversations about this, and we actually had a very good conversation with a wonderful man, Rabbi Nicky Liss, a rabbi in North London who advised the Imperial War Museum and advised the BBC, and we had a good conversation with him. And I said, I was so heartened when he watched a cut of the film and said, thank you for telling this story, because it's been left unsaid for so long, and thank you for doing it the way you've done it. And I thought, okay, mission accomplished. Because if nothing else, if nobody watches it, or if 6 people watch it and a dog called Colin, it's just like I still have that somebody who really is invested in this. And I got the same sort of feedback from people like Ruta and so on, who said, thank you. So it sounds horrendously pretentious, but I felt a huge moral responsibility, actually. That's right.
And you told me a great anecdote, which I think goes to the heart of the joys of filmmaking, that you were listening to, I think, Translation of Rushes, and there's a line that you kind of think, that's it, that's what this film is about, but it doesn't actually make the final cut.
Oh gosh, yeah. I was in conversation with Ruta Vanagaita, the wonderful Lithuanian journalist who'd spent 20 years trying to uncover this story and tell her own people about it. He got vilified, forced into exile. And in chat with James, I sort of said at some point, we're talking about the Holocaust as sort of vast numbers of people being killed. What does it mean to you? What is a Holocaust? Because in a sense, this is what the film is about. We're getting to the nature of what a Holocaust is. It's not camps. It's actually that effect that you see on the ground. And I wasn't articulating it very well. And I said, Ruta, what's your sense of this? And she said, the Holocaust is not the history of mass murder. It's what happens when you see other people as them. And then there's the pit.
Wow.
Just that moment, just sitting in that cafe in Vilnius, I thought, that's it. That's got to go in the film. That is it. And when we came to cut the film, couldn't find a place for it. It didn't fit naturally in the conversation. It felt right as a thing to say, but I couldn't find a place to say it in a way that didn't feel like us going, and here's the message from the sponsor, saying, listen to this. This is what you need to know. But interestingly, I was talking to a wonderful editor, Julie, about this, and she said, actually, you kind of don't need to say it because it's been said. That's the film is saying it. And if you layer that on top, it just feels like overkill. It feels like a mission statement. But actually,
was it one of those things you kept revisiting though?
That's right.
Every morning and saying,
"There's got to be a place for it.
Great idea. Let's try it here."
How can I get this in? And it requires the wisdom of someone else sometimes sitting back saying, don't do it. You don't need to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are always those moments in films, aren't there, where you just, I mean, we shot entire scenes actually that we didn't find space for. There were additional thoughts to the it's almost like saying, oh, and another thing.
Yeah.
Oh, and another thing. And we were trying to sort of create these sort of extra spaces for extra ideas just to, build on what we already had.
Congratulations to you and Julie, because I think it's such a beautifully paced film. I think, you made all the right decisions in the end, because if you put more in, you got less out somehow as a viewer. You need time to process it, and it's beautifully paced. There's a difficulty, I guess, making films about the Holocaust, that you have such an access to such a well of emotion.
Yes.
That, balancing out the new information and not overdoing the emotion, is that a difficult thing to do?
It is. It is. Again, this is where the value of a good editor comes in, who's looking at the material completely fresh, who hasn't lived with it for 2 years, who can just look at it and go, what is this really telling us, and how much do we need to say about it? And it was early on, we both agreed that and you're right, to sort of put less in to get more out, so that you just allow spaces for things to just sit, because there's such a concentration of imagery and thought and emotion. Just some of those still shots are so overpowering. You just need to just leave them there. Yeah. If you create the right space for them in the film and put them in the right places, it's like the aftermath imagery of Babin Yar. Just those pictures of things left behind by people who were killed. You just sometimes need to let that just sit there and say nothing. Just say nothing. Trust the audience to make those connections, and not try and make the connections for the audience. And just, leave spaces for things and let the audience do the work, which is, so much of these kinds of films, so much of what we're told to do in TV by executive producers is tell the audience what to think about this, tee it up, say you say it, and and so on, and over deliver, content like that. And the subject matter of this demanded something else. It demanded that we just kind of put it there.
Yeah.
And put it there in the company of James, who would say the right thing. And I trusted exactly. I knew with the right things in front of him and the right encounters with the right people, that he would deliver the right thoughts, because he was not trying to deliver anything. He was simply responding to it as a person, as a historian. And I like those moments of discomfort, not because they're uncomfortable, but because you can see in his head him making those connections and going, and when you see him, you do it with him.
It encapsulates this film for me why television history is important because yes, it gives us new information, certainly new to the audience, but it also makes you feel so vividly. And as you say, it's quite often in just one still photograph or even a pause with music.
Mm.
Television documentary has a power that the written word sometimes doesn't have.
Yes, yes, yes. It's just that it's that lens, isn't it? It just sort of focuses on a single moment, but it's. I think it does, and one of the things that for me as a sort of telling a history story, I'm going to digress a little bit here. Bear with me for a moment, if you will. When I was in Kiev, one of the things I was talking to them about, has been a plan for years to build a massive new memorial to the massacre at Babin Yar in Kiev. And the artistic director, a Russian filmmaker called Ilya Zhinovsky, was talking to me about what he wanted to achieve. I thought, well, there's artistic director for a Holocaust memorial? Why do you need one? And he said, because if you simply put the information in front of your visitors, in front of your audience, you're at one remove from it. And he said, what I want to do is I want to find a way of breaking that wall so that you can immerse the audience in that story and see it not as history, but as a sequence of human events, so that they understand this. That he said, what I want them to understand is they could have been any one of those people. So if you take an event like Babin Yar, his idea for sort of the experience of the visitor experience he wanted to create was to say, when you come to this experience, I want you to understand that you could have been a soldier, a police officer, a victim, a bystander. Just the roll of the dice of history puts you in any one of those places. You can be any one of those people. Holocaust is not about structures and plans. It's about how people in those spaces behave
Yeah,
and choose to behave.
yeah, yeah.
That's and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And that conversation with Ilya stuck with me when I was making this film. That I wanted to try and get into the warp and weft of it, so that the audience understood that it's about ordinary people like them. They could have been any of those people, which is why the film ends where and how it ends, with those thoughts that the ideology was Hitler's, but the action was of people like you
Yeah, yeah,
making those decisions.
yeah. So every film is a potential thousand other films.
Yeah.
And one of the anecdotes that we discussed that stuck with me is just every director's nightmare. I want to talk about the editing and the music. Just it's a great anecdote that I think lets people in. You watch a film like yours and you think, oh, it's just a procession of inevitabilities to come to
No.
this, but it's far from it. So tell us the music anecdote.
Well, so I had a collection of photographs that are in the film, and I was trying to find music, and I was using these photographs. This is before we even started the edit. In fact, before we'd even started shooting, and it had this set of really powerful photographs that told the story all in themselves. And I was just trying to find a kind of music that would sit with those images, because we talked earlier about the sort of the power of a single image and how sometimes you just need to leave it and let the audience absorb it. So I was listening to something, and a friend said, "Oh, you should listen to this composer, wonderful American composer called Caroline Shaw, modern classical composer." And I hit on one piece of music from one of her albums. It was something that she sang, and I just put these two things together, and wow! And a jolt of electricity went through my spine. I was just like, "Oh my God, there's something about this." And I wrote to her agent and said, I've been looking at these pictures and I've been listening to this piece of music, and I want to use this music in this film because it does this to me. And I think when you listen and you look, you'll find that it does it to you. And so that's what I'd like to do. And I said, by the way, I complete upfront, no money. I can't afford to pay you. But if Caroline would like to be involved in the project and do it, for the sake of doing it, I think it'd be great exposure for her, and I think it would just really help this film. And he said, that sounds great. Here are a couple of albums you can use. So I thought, oh, this is fantastic. Got into the edit suite with Julie, and we started working with some of Caroline's music, and it just worked. It was beautiful. Not everywhere, but I would say 30 to 50% of the music was hers. It was just sat perfectly. A week before A week before picture lock, I get this message from the line producer saying her other agent in California, her publishing agent, would like a lot of money. Oh God! Oh, great timing. And he said, we tried talking them around and blah blah blah. We just can't get to a deal. We just can't do it. So you're gonna have to take it all out. And I sort of broke this news to Julie. I said, this isn't good. And my goodness, she earned every penny of her salary just in that week, just by going, okay, leave it with me. Go away, go and have some coffee. Just leave me alone. Just go, I will fix this. And you would never know.
No, you wouldn't. And Julia, if
Never
you're
know.
watching,
I
Julia,
mean,
if you're watching, a good job because you absolutely did fix it. But you've kind of put your finger on the nub of really why the Content Club exists and everything that's kind of a little bit
yeah.
wrong with television documentaries. There just isn't enough money to allow people like you to necessarily do their best job all the time. This looks like a phenomenally well-funded BBC Two documentary, but behind the scenes, BBC Two put in, I don't know, 50% of the money. You had to go off and find co-production. Talk to us a little bit about those
Well,
difficulties.
yeah. I mean, this happens all the time. Anybody watching this who makes these kind of projects will know. I mean, we've all been through this. I did a film a few years ago for another company. We had four or five. I've lost count. 4 or 5 co-productions because the budget was required was so big, and you end up making as many versions as you possibly can. But of course, they've all got competing ideas of what they think that film is going to be, and they all think they own it exclusively, or they feel like they need to own it exclusively. And this is not, let me say right up front, I don't hold a grudge against any of these commission executives. They're all doing a very difficult job. It must be hell. Your budget says you've got this much. You want a film that costs this much. How are you going to do it? They're in the same position we're in. We're all trying to make the best thing we can and juggle those, get those plates spinning and juggle those contents. So we had 2 co-producers ultimately, and the journey to get them together was long and quite tortuous, and not because they didn't want to talk to each other or anything like that. It's just that they wanted very, very different things. So we had National Geographic on one side and BBC on the other. And the BBC film, in conversations with Simon, we know we wanted a film. He said to me, I want a good old-fashioned documentary. I want this personal journey. It wants to be very intimate. It wants to be very personal. It wants to be very sort of nuanced film. So beautiful. That's what I want to make. National Geographic wanted a very different vibe. For them, it was all about process. It was about numbers. It was about action. It was about, they wanted to cram as much in as they could and keep the energy flowing. And, that's fine. That's their shtick. That's what their audience loves. So we had to try and juggle these 2 things on location. We found a system that worked whereby we would shoot all the process first, then we'd bring James in and he would pick up the meaning of that process. He would pick up the sort of the punchline of that, what they were doing, rather than the process itself. And as a system, that sort of worked. But inevitably, and when you've got a small team, inevitably you're constantly on the ground going, okay, let's put our National Geographic head on. We've covered as much of this as we possibly can, and we've got that done. And then BBC head, and you're shifting, you're changing constantly, and second guessing on the ground, and so on and so forth. So as a sort of production dynamic, a production system, it's far from ideal. And then of course you get into the edit suites, 2 completely separate edit suites, of course, with different editors and different vibes and so on and so forth, and you're spinning the same material in different ways. So that in itself was enormously challenging. Plus which, we, as often happens with these things, these deals were not fully done by the time we started the production or even started the shoot, because we had archaeology we knew was happening. We had our American team saying, we are going to Lithuania on these dates, we are going to Latvia on these dates, we're going to go to these places, we're going to investigate these things. We have no idea what we're going to find. Come along if you want to, but we're not going to alter our schedule for you because we're fixed. And that all happened, and we said, well, we just have to go. And so we're kind of, with all this sort of shooting was happening while we're still trying to do the deals and negotiate the money, and we didn't know if we had enough money, and la 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 la. So you're sort of constantly just sort of running on a sort of catch-up mode all the time just to get the thing going. And of course, as everybody knows, excuse me, these budgets are getting progressively smaller and tighter, and costs are getting higher and higher and higher. So this, you're in this sort of compress now that's just getting tighter and tighter and tighter. We had fundamentally to shoot all that. It was a two-man team. It was me and Ben Holgate. That was it throughout, pretty much the whole thing. We had a sound recordist on, I think, one day, maybe two. The rest of the time is Ben doing superhuman job, shooting everything, doing the sound, me directing. In the good old days, you'd have had a team of 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
You'd have had a production assistant. You'd have had an assistant producer with you. You'd have had a sound recorder. So, and this is, again, nobody's fault. It's just the dynamic of the business that is just doing this all the time.
I think the reason it's such a remarkable film is because the one thing that didn't get squeezed out by the lack of money is the thinking time. You put 2 years of your own thinking time into it. But I just want to make this point to you who are listening out there. This conversation is why television history is dying. So if you love television history, join the Content Club, put some money in, let people like Nick do their best work. Nick, when you finish a film like this as a PD, I always used to think before I worked in television that, you would be carried around the room like the end of a Harry Potter film and people would give you your next film. It doesn't quite work like that, does it?
No, I mean, sorry, forgive me for coughing. I'm
coughing and hollow laughing.
Coughing and hollow laughing. No, I mean, I'm sort of looking for the next project like everybody else. I've had a few things in development as ideas, which I'm hoping at least some of them are going to come to fruition. You're on that sort of constant sort of cycle of jumping from moving crocodile to moving crocodile, trying to sort of get things moving and stay afloat, and so on and so forth. One thing I would say, and you thank you for mentioning this, that the lead time on this was incredibly long. This was just because this was a passion project for me. I just would not let it go, and Dinah, wonderful Dinah Lord at Caravan, was sort of good enough to say, I also believe in this, and I'm going to try and keep this going for you, with you, so that we can both get it over the line. But I know she did a lot of unfunded work. I did basically a year of unfunded development on this, because I didn't want to let it go. But I was fortunate. I was just about managed to do that. But at any point in that time, someone would have said, "Here's a gig." I would go, "Oh, yeah, I need the money. I'm off," and it's gone. It's abandoned. You've said, "Sorry, I'd love to do it, but I just can't devote that much time." And I think what's happening more and more and more in the business now is things are only being commissioned when all the pre-production is done as part of the pitching process.
Yeah,
and that's. And this is putting a tighter and tighter squeeze on individuals and on the companies to keep funding. I mean, you can see this happening in every small company now. Wow. They're trying to fund their own development, and that development then turns into what is in effect the pre-production of the project when it gets commissioned.
But also, you make the wrong film. You make the wrong film. There used to be a dictum in BBC documentaries when, I was lucky enough to be a producer there, and it ruled the world. If the film you make is the piece of A4 that you originally pitched, then you've made the wrong film. And quite often now, by the time you get to a commission, you've actually written the script. So, it's change, or you're locked in. Nick, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us here at the Content Club. That was an absolutely riveting insight into the highs and lows of what lies behind making what I'm sure is going to be an award-winning film. I wish you all the best, and I hope that you'll come and make films with us here at the Content Club.
I would dearly love to do that. I'd certainly like to do that.
Okay, Nick.
It's been great to talk to you, John. Thank you so much.
All the best.